Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. We're not beginning with a scream or a pool of blood. We're starting with something quieter, something heavier, something you can't see but can't forget. It was the smell, stale, sour, unmistakably wrong. Jared Byrd had smelled death once before. That day, July 19th, 2025, he smelled it again, inside his father's house. The air conditioning hummed. The curtains were drawn tight. Nothing looked broken, nothing shattered, nothing screaming for help. But that smell, that told a different story. Jared stepped into the hallway, slowly, cautiously. The smell got thicker as he moved closer to the living room. And that's when he saw it. A large, bulky object wrapped in a heavy rug, sealed tight with what looked like nylon straps. The shape underneath had a weight to it, not just in mass, but in implication. The human mind tries to reject what the eyes already understand. But Jared knew. He backed up, fumbled for his phone, and called 911. Bexar County Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. The house was calm, still, too still. One of the responding officers later wrote in his report, "The odor met us at the door. I've worked decomp before. This wasn't weeks old. This was close to a month." The living room was dim but orderly. No blood, no overturned furniture. No signs of a break-in, just that shape, rolled and tied, lying behind the coffee table. Officers unwrapped the layers methodically. A comforter, plastic sheeting, another blanket, then skin. A partially decomposed body of an adult woman, wrapped head to toe. No obvious stab wounds, no signs of blunt trauma externally. But the smell, the swelling, the state of the remains. It was clear she'd been there for weeks. Silently. Disintegrating inside the home she once lived in. The body was later identified through dental records as 44-year-old Angela Byrd. From that moment, this was no longer a welfare check. It was a crime scene. The house was sealed. Homicide was called in. Crime scene units began the slow, precise task of documenting everything. Temperature readings, luminol tests, trace evidence collection. The thermostat had been set unnaturally low, likely in an attempt to delay decomposition. Chemical air fresheners were found taped to vents. Baking soda lined the edges of baseboards. There was no question. Someone had tried to cover the smell. Not prevent it, just delay the inevitable. There was no forced entry. No evidence that Angela had tried to leave. No signs of a break-in. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone was on the kitchen table, powered off. Her purse sat beneath a chair, untouched. Investigators took inventory. No signs of valuables missing, no signs of a struggle in the living areas. But in the primary bedroom, they found the first clue that this wasn't sudden. It was intentional. Under the bed was a partially full bottle of industrial-strength odor neutralizer, typically used in waste treatment facilities. It was a product not easily purchased by the general public. That detail, according to one investigator, raised immediate concern. We weren't just dealing with a death. We were dealing with someone who had time, resources, and the presence of mind to delay discovery. By the end of the day, Angela's remains were transported to the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office for autopsy. An initial field analysis suggested the body had been deceased for approximately 25 to 30 days. That put the estimated date of death in the range of June 17th to June 20th. As the sun set that evening, officers gathered outside the house, sweat clinging to their vests in the Texas humidity. They weren't discussing theories. Not yet. They were asking the most basic question: where is Charles Byrd? Jared Byrd, now in a taped interview room, answered what he could. He hadn't seen his father in nearly 2 weeks. He said Charles had texted him sporadically, mostly short responses like busy, not home, try next week. He told detectives that Angela hadn't replied to any of his messages since mid-June. I asked if she was okay, Jared said. He told me she went to visit family. Angela didn't have local family. That lie, paired with the body, shifted everything. A bolo, be on the lookout, was issued for Charles Van Doyle Byrd, 49 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, last seen driving a silver 2014 Chevrolet Silverado. Neighbors said he hadn't been around for at least a week. One neighbor mentioned that lights had been on at night, but the curtains never opened. By nightfall, detectives had spoken with co-workers at the school district where Charles worked as a maintenance tech. One supervisor reported Charles hadn't shown up since July 12th, 7 days earlier. He said he was sick, the supervisor recalled. Didn't seem too serious. Detectives obtained cell tower records tied to Charles's phone. The last signal from his device had pinged near an abandoned property on County Road 369, just 3 miles from the house. But by the time they arrived to check the location, it was empty. What they did find, a cot, 2 empty water jugs, a half-eaten protein bar, and a jacket that matched one Charles had worn in a school ID badge photo. At this point, law enforcement didn't publicly announce Angela's cause of death. That would come later, after toxicology, after a full autopsy. But inside the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, they were already treating this as a homicide investigation. Angela Byrd had died. Not suddenly, not peacefully. And someone had gone to considerable lengths to make sure she wasn't found. The question wasn't just who had done this. It was why no one noticed, why no one knocked, why, in the middle of a Texas summer, a woman could die and lie for a month, behind closed curtains, without anyone hearing a sound. When investigators walked back through the house on Lost Hills Drive the following morning, their focus had already shifted. The body was gone. The odor remained. And now the scene had to speak in the victim's absence. Her name was Angela Byrd. 44 years old. No children. A former office manager, currently between jobs, known for being private but polite. She lived in that house with her husband Charles for just over 3 years. Neighbors described them as quiet. Kept to themselves, one said. You wouldn't even know someone lived there if the truck wasn't out front. No one in the neighborhood had seen Angela since June, and no one called. Not her friends, not extended family, not a single coworker. In the words of one detective, she disappeared silently, and no one noticed she was gone. The victim's phone was recovered from the kitchen table. Screen cracked but still intact. It was powered off. Digital forensic analysts extracted the full contents. The last text Angela sent was dated June 17, 2025 at 6:42 p.m. It read, "Can't talk, he's home." That text went to a friend in another state. That friend, when contacted, said she thought Angela had just gone quiet. She'd done that before after arguments. I didn't think it meant something was wrong. I thought it meant she was tired. That assumption now sat at the center of the case. Investigators worked fast to piece together a digital timeline. Angela had an old model Samsung. Her GPS tracking was inconsistent, but on June 17th at 3:26 p.m. her phone showed activity near a grocery store in the area. Then back home by 4:11 p.m. No further location pings after that. Bank records supported the timeline. A debit transaction for $17.43 at a local HEB matched the location data. A security camera at the store confirmed it. Angela appeared on video, dressed casually, no signs of visible injury, walking alone. That would be the last visual record of her alive. Forensic techs also pulled Wi-Fi activity logs from the Byrd residence. Angela's device disconnected from the network at 9:03 p.m. that same night. It was never reconnected. That line of data, while not conclusive, suggested a clear window for investigators. Sometime between 6:42 p.m. and 9:03 p.m. something happened. After that, there was only silence. Investigators canvassed further. They searched for phone calls, messages, digital footprints, anything. Angela's email had not been logged into since the same date. No transactions, no searches, no social media activity. She simply vanished digitally, just as she had physically. Detectives also examined her routines. She was part of a small book club that met bi-weekly. She missed both June and July sessions. A dental appointment had been scheduled for June 25th. She never canceled. She never showed. The receptionist remembered calling and getting no answer. That missing appointment became a key marker. In many investigations, skipped appointments help build timelines more reliably than digital metadata. They show intent, or the lack of it. Angela had every reason to be there. And yet, by that point, her body had already been decaying in the house for over a week. None of this sat right with the lead investigator. The timeline was too clean. Every digital trace ended on the same night. That's not natural. That's control. Another layer came from Jared Byrd's interview. Jared told detectives that he'd texted Angela 3 times in late June. No response. He also said Charles seemed evasive when asked about her. He said she'd gone to visit family but never said where. When I pushed him, he got short with me, told me to stay out of it. Angela didn't have close family in state. Most of her relatives lived in Michigan and hadn't seen her in person since 2023. None had spoken to her by phone in months. When asked if she was planning a visit, they all said no. They didn't even know she was missing. What struck investigators was not just the lack of reports, but the absence of concern. Angela disappeared, and no one followed up. There were no wellness checks, no police calls, just silence. That silence, they would later argue, enabled the concealment. It gave time, it gave distance, it gave someone the chance to hide a body in plain sight. By the end of July 20th, the case had evolved. Angela Byrd was now formally classified as a homicide victim, and while her husband was still missing, the forensic profile was tightening. The timeline had structure. The data pointed to one clear conclusion. Angela had not left voluntarily. She had been stopped. When deputies confirmed the identity of the body found in the living room, they turned their attention to the only person unaccounted for. Charles Van Doyle Byrd, age 49, last seen by neighbors more than a week before the discovery. A bolo had already been issued the day before, but now his absence carried new legal weight. The death had been reclassified as a homicide. That changed everything. At 6:40 a.m. on July 20th, 2025, investigators obtained a warrant to search Charles Byrd's digital footprint. His cell phone carrier, email providers, and financial institutions were contacted. The goal was not speculation. It was trace, movement, behavior, pattern. Charles's cell phone pinged its last tower the evening of July 17th, 2 days before Angela's body was discovered. That ping placed him near a wooded area off County Road 369, roughly 3 miles from his residence. It wasn't a public park. It wasn't near any business. It was private, undeveloped property owned by a company based out of state. Deputies conducted a search that morning and found signs of temporary occupancy: a blanket on the floor, 2 unopened cans of food, a flashlight, and an empty water jug. There were also cigarette butts, same brand Charles had been known to smoke, according to his personnel file. They didn't find him there. At 8:12 a.m., the lead investigator submitted a motion for access to Charles's work credentials at Floresville Independent School District. He had been employed as a maintenance technician for nearly 8 years. Reliable, quiet, no disciplinary history. A background check showed no criminal record. But according to his supervisor, Charles had stopped showing up for work on July 12th, claiming via text that he was taking time to get his head straight. That phrase stuck with the investigative team. It suggested premeditation, not panic. Forensic teams pulled Charles's digital activity from his district-issued laptop. Last login was July 10th. A deleted internet history showed searches for terms like decomposition in heat, how long to smell body, and baking soda odor masking. Those searches occurred in late June, before anyone knew Angela was dead. Metadata confirmed timestamps. Those logs became part of the case file. Meanwhile, Charles's bank records showed minimal activity. One ATM withdrawal of $60 on July 13th from a gas station ATM. No card use since, no hotel bookings, no travel reservations. His vehicle, a 2014 Chevrolet Silverado, was also missing. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station on the 13th showed that same vehicle idling outside. Charles appeared briefly on camera, alone, wearing a cap, withdrawing cash. At this point, he was no longer just a person of interest. He was a missing subject in a homicide investigation. Detectives believed he was likely still in the area, possibly using cash and staying off the grid, not because he was confused, because he was avoiding being found. By late afternoon, a neighbor came forward. She recalled seeing Charles a few days earlier walking behind the house at dusk, and he wasn't carrying anything, just walking in circles, according to her. I thought he was talking to himself, but maybe he was on the phone. Or maybe not. The interview added an odd psychological layer. Investigators noted that behavior like this could indicate stress, but not necessarily remorse. More importantly, it helped build a timeline. If Charles had been on the property as recently as July 16th, then he had spent nearly a month coming and going from a house containing a dead body without alerting anyone. That fact shaped the psychological profile the sheriff's office began to quietly build. Charles had not acted impulsively. He had not fled in a panic. He had withdrawn, covered his tracks, and remained close. The question was no longer where he went. It was why he stayed so long. The next morning, a tip came in. A local property manager had called about suspicious activity at one of his vacant rentals, a small, boarded-up structure near FM 539, just a few minutes from the previous ping. A deputy unit was dispatched. Entry was forced after no response. Inside, they found him. Charles Byrd was lying on the floor in the back room. Alive. Awake. Calm. He made no attempt to flee. He did not ask questions. He said only this: "This was my first crime. Go big or go home." The deputy who processed him later wrote in the report, "He didn't look scared. He looked resigned, like this was always going to end with us knocking." Charles was transported to the Byrd County Jail without incident. He was initially held on a charge of tampering with evidence, specifically with a human corpse. Additional charges were pending the final autopsy. He requested a public defender. He declined to provide a statement. The autopsy was scheduled within 24 hours of Angela Byrd's remains being removed from the house on Lost Hills Drive. In Byrd County, cases involving suspicious deaths with signs of concealment are prioritized. This case met every marker for forensic urgency. The body arrived at the medical examiner's facility at 9:08 a.m. on July 20th, 2025. The transport log indicated moderate bloating, skin slippage, and clear signs of advanced decomposition, consistent with 25 to 30 days of postmortem delay in a controlled indoor environment. The estimated date of death was tentatively marked between June 17th and June 20th. This range aligned with the digital forensics already recovered. Her last phone activity, last bank transaction, last known appearance on surveillance, all clustered within a 48-hour window. But the autopsy would test that timeline further. It wasn't just about when she died, it was about how and whether it could have been prevented. A full-body CT scan was completed prior to internal examination. The scan revealed no fractures to the skull or limbs, no defensive wounds, no embedded foreign objects. But the scan did reveal something else: a darkened area in the soft tissues around the neck, subtle but not insignificant. The external examination confirmed those signs. There was no ligature found at the scene, but the pattern around her neck suggested manual compression, not accidental trauma. The presence of petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes and inner eyelids further supported a working theory: mechanical asphyxiation. Internal analysis continued for 6 hours. The body had been wrapped in multiple layers: first a comforter, then plastic sheeting, then a rug, all secured with ratchet straps. The weight of that alone had left post-mortem indentations on her torso and limbs, but those marks occurred after death. They didn't cause it. What did cause it, according to the final report issued July 22nd, was a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma to the larynx, likely the result of pressure from a hand or forearm, applied with force and sustained for several seconds. Toxicology was completed using preserved samples. No drugs, no alcohol, no overdose. There was nothing in her system that would explain unconsciousness, impairment, or a medical event. She was healthy, she was awake, and she was killed. The ME summary was definitive. Cause of death: mechanical asphyxiation due to neck compression. Manner of death: homicide. With that, homicide detectives had their confirmation. The data matched the body, the time matched the digital trail, and the absence of any post-mortem injury confirmed what they had suspected. Angela Byrd never left that house alive. Back at the crime scene, forensic analysts conducted a secondary pass. With the cause of death established, they revisited the master bedroom. A search under UV light revealed minor drag patterns on the hardwood flooring, small friction streaks leading from the hallway to the living room. They were too faint for the naked eye. No blood, no tissue, just small pressure markings consistent with carpet burn from moving a wrapped body. Analysts used chemical reagent testing in the bathroom and found faint traces of biological residue around the shower drain. Again, not visible without enhancement. This suggested a possible cleanup effort, but nothing extensive, nothing professional. They also reprocessed the ratchet straps used to bind the outermost rug. Fingerprint recovery from the nylon surface yielded partials, enough to confirm they belonged to the same individual who last handled Angela's phone in her vehicle. Chain of custody confirmed the match. When investigators reviewed all forensic points together, physical pressure on the neck, drag patterns to the rug, restraint method with common home tools, and a complete absence of effort to report the death, it painted one picture, a controlled scene, not one done in panic, not one done in seconds. A death hidden deliberately, but the question still lingered in the back of every report. Why so little resistance? Angela Byrd was 5'4". Her medical history showed no physical limitations, no injuries, no sedatives, no physical signs of struggle. That suggested she may have been caught off guard, possibly attacked from behind, possibly in an argument that turned physical before she could respond. The details were clinical, but the implications weren't. Angela's body had been left in her own home, wrapped and compressed for nearly a month. In that time, bills were paid. Trash was taken out. The thermostat was adjusted to slow decay. A person lived in that house with her remains just feet away. That level of management, intentional and sustained, deepened the profile investigators were quietly building. The working theory at the end of July 22nd was no longer based on mystery. It was built on measurable events. The forensic evidence showed a timeline that began the night of June 17th and extended 30 days forward, from murder to concealment to discovery. Angela had been killed, wrapped, stored, hidden. Her absence noticed by no one but eventually exposed by biology itself. The body spoke, and what it said was methodical. The most difficult questions in this case were never about forensic evidence, not about fingerprints, time of death, or cause of asphyxiation. Those were measurable. Cataloged, understood. The harder questions had no checklist. Why didn't anyone call? Why didn't anyone knock? And how could a woman lie dead in her home for nearly a month without triggering a single welfare check? Angela Byrd had not vanished in the wilderness. She wasn't on the run. She lived in a modest single-story house on a residential street in Byrd County. Neighbors passed by daily. The trash was still being picked up. Packages were delivered. Electric bills were paid. Nothing on the outside of the property screamed danger, but the truth sat inside, wrapped in blankets and decay. By July 21st, investigators shifted part of their focus to the social and relational gaps surrounding Angela. A timeline was built not just from tech and pathology, but from silence. The last verified communication from her came on June 17th. She sent a short text at 6:42 p.m. No replies after. No phone calls answered. Her social media accounts went inactive that same night. No one reached out. That data didn't come from some national alert system. It came from backtracking, after the body had already been discovered. Detectives interviewed friends, former co-workers, and relatives in other states. They described Angela as quiet, non-confrontational, and a bit withdrawn since her last job ended. Some admitted they hadn't heard from her in weeks. Others thought she was traveling or simply needed space. No one could name the last person who spoke to her on the phone. That kind of gap isn't unusual in domestic violence cases, according to behavioral analysts brought in during the review. Victims often isolate themselves slowly over time, whether by choice or coercion. The red flags aren't always loud. They can look like missed texts, skipped appointments, or sudden silence. Angela had no children, no local family. She wasn't on anyone's daily radar. That gave her killer time. Between June 17 and July 19th, not a single formal report of concern was filed. There were no 911 calls, no anonymous tips, and no door checks. One friend, when questioned, said, "I wanted to call, but I wasn't sure it was my place. I figured maybe she was just tired." Detectives flagged that hesitation in their internal review. A note in the case file stated, "This victim did not vanish. She was simply unseen." A second tier of analysis focused on the home's community environment. The Byrds lived in a part of eastern Byrd County with limited through traffic. Their street had no HOA and few neighborly ties. One neighbor admitted they hadn't spoken to Angela in over a year. Another thought the couple had moved out. Environmental psychology calls this social desensitization. When signs are subtle and residents are disengaged, red flags often go unnoticed, or worse, ignored. By July 22nd, a broader question had emerged inside the sheriff's department. If Angela hadn't been discovered on July 19th, if Jared hadn't pushed to visit the house, How much longer would she have gone undiscovered? That question wasn't rhetorical. Forensic analysts had already noted that the body was approaching a tipping point. If the temperature hadn't been kept artificially low, if the layers of plastic and fabric hadn't been sealed as tightly, the odor would have escaped sooner. A neighbor might have noticed, a utility worker might have called it in, but none of that happened. This case wasn't just about what was done, it was about what wasn't done. No forced entry, no damage, no blood trails across floors, just quiet concealment and a silence that no one challenged. There's no statute or city ordinance requiring someone to check in on a neighbor. There's no law mandating friendship. But investigators noted a pattern in their report. Angela's isolation gave room for neglect. The house didn't hide her. People did, by assuming nothing was wrong. By the end of that week, law enforcement began outreach through local media. It wasn't to sensationalize the case, it was to warn. They issued guidance on early indicators of danger: social withdrawal, uncharacteristic phone silence, skipped appointments. The department also coordinated with local advocacy groups to encourage communities to act sooner. The message wasn't complex. If someone disappears from routine, don't wait until it smells. In cases like this, the digital residue left behind often says more than words ever could. Angela Byrd hadn't logged into any of her social media accounts since early April. No posts, no messages. Her phone, recovered from the floor near the master bedroom closet, hadn't made or received a call in over a month. For a woman who had been actively managing household bills, checking in with relatives, and coordinating appointments, this digital silence raised alarms well beyond the initial disappearance. On April 25, 2025, detectives secured a warrant for the retrieval and analysis of all devices from inside the Byrd residence, including Charles Van Doyle Byrd's mobile phone, 3 laptops, and an Alexa-enabled smart speaker. All devices were turned over to the Houston Police Department's Cyber Forensics Unit. It didn't take long to find discrepancies. Charles claimed Angela left voluntarily sometime in mid-March, but his own search history told a different story. On March 15th, his phone pinged a series of disturbing queries. How long does it take a body to decompose wrapped in plastic? Can you hide the smell of a dead body with bleach? How long before someone reports a missing person if no one files a report? These weren't the idle thoughts of a panicked man trying to understand his wife's disappearance. These were time-stamped, intentional, and occurred before any official report was made. The search queries, matched with his internet activity, created a damning digital footprint. That same night, his phone connected to the home's Wi-Fi at 3:47 a.m., well outside his normal routine. Investigators also noted Angela's bank card had not been used since March 13th, the day she was last seen alive by neighbors. Surveillance from a nearby pharmacy, Angela's last known public appearance, showed her alone, purchasing over-the-counter medication and 2 small gift bags. She had appeared calm. Nothing about her demeanor suggested plans to disappear. But what sealed the investigators' focus back on Charles wasn't just the digital forensics. It was the motion sensor history pulled from their home security system. According to the data, there was a significant burst of activity between 2:10 a.m. and 3:50 a.m. on March 14th, unusual considering both were reportedly asleep during those hours. Inside the smart home system's logs, investigators found that the garage door opened at 2:12 a.m. and remained open for over an hour. That same period recorded weight fluctuations on the home's interior motion-sensitive mat, the kind designed to track pet movement, except this time the pressure changes were heavy, too heavy for a dog or cat. Investigators believe this was the movement of a human body. By early May, these findings were cross-referenced with a new piece of forensic evidence. Fragments of clear plastic wrap discovered near Angela's remains bore faint impressions of carpet fibers. Those fibers matched samples taken from the Byrd's bedroom carpet. The connection was critical. It established that the body had at some point been in the bedroom and was likely wrapped there before being relocated to the area of the home where she was ultimately found. Forensic pathologists reported decomposition consistent with a timeline starting between March 13th and March 15th, aligning with Charles's suspicious online activity and the digital gaps in Angela's phone usage. Though the exact cause of death was still pending due to the advanced decomposition, Investigators now had enough circumstantial and digital evidence to challenge Charles's account directly. When officers conducted a follow-up interview on May 10th, Charles remained evasive. He stated again that Angela had been depressed, that she talked about vanishing. But when confronted with his search history, he went silent for nearly 2 full minutes. No denial, no clarification, just silence. He asked if he needed a lawyer. He was informed he should probably get one. By the second week of May 2025, the evidence was no longer circumstantial. It had weight, digital logs, forensic matches, inconsistencies in statements, and most of all, the body. There was no more room for theory. On May 16th, Charles Vandoyle Byrd was arrested at his workplace in Harris County, Texas. The arrest warrant cited concealment of a human corpse, obstruction of justice, and tampering with physical evidence. At that point, formal murder charges were still pending. The medical examiner's report had yet to confirm a cause of death, but the surrounding facts pushed law enforcement to act preemptively. Detectives made the decision to avoid a media spectacle. Byrd was brought in through a secure entrance, processed quietly, and placed under suicide watch due to erratic behavior during his initial interview. He made no statements. He requested an attorney within the hour. As is standard procedure, the charging documents were filed under seal temporarily to avoid compromising the remaining phases of the investigation. But by the afternoon, details had begun to leak. Local outlets confirmed that Byrd's arrest was tied to the discovery of Angela Byrd's decomposed remains found in their shared home nearly a month prior. Public reaction came swiftly. Neighbors expressed shock that the home, which had remained under the same roofline in suburban quiet for years, now stood as the center of a homicide case. Former co-workers of Angela noted her long-standing efforts to separate from Charles quietly. Financial documents recovered by police indicated she had opened a new account under her name just weeks before she went missing. Authorities disclosed for the first time that Angela had initiated inquiries about divorce in early 2025. Emails recovered from her Gmail account showed that she had reached out to a local family attorney on February 18th asking for a private consultation. That meeting never happened. In a later press conference, Harris County lead investigator Captain Drexler remarked, "This wasn't a crime of impulse. This was a series of choices, calculated, delayed, and ultimately revealed by the very systems meant to protect them." At the same time, forensic updates arrived from the lab. The state pathologist had completed the full report. While decomposition had obscured visual trauma, they confirmed blunt force impact to the back of the skull consistent with a heavy household object. Microscopic fractures matched a linear strike pattern, not a fall, not an accident. In response, the DA's office upgraded the charges. On May 23rd, Charles Byrd was officially charged with second-degree murder alongside earlier obstruction charges. Bail was denied. Angela's family released a written statement. She did not vanish. She was taken. And now we ask for justice, not just in the courts, but in how we treat women who try to leave. By the time authorities officially charged Charles Vandoyle Byrd with abuse of a corpse, it was July 2025. The arrest had been days in the making, but the signs had been there for weeks. Angela Byrd's body had decomposed inside her own home, wrapped in plastic, sealed away, hidden behind locked doors, long enough to raise not just suspicion, but horror. In the early morning of July 5th, the warrant was executed. Byrd was located in a neighboring county, unarmed, alone, and calm. According to deputies, he didn't resist, didn't ask questions, just said, "Go big or go home." That was his only statement. It matched nothing of the crime's weight. From a prosecutorial standpoint, the case was, and remains, complicated. As of July 23, 2025, no murder charge has been filed. What exists is a charge of abuse of a corpse and potentially tampering with evidence, both felonies under Texas law. But the line between evidence mishandling and outright homicide is fine and requires what investigators haven't yet shared: a cause of death. Angela's body had deteriorated for over a month before discovery. The autopsy, conducted at the Montgomery County Forensic Center, revealed advanced decomposition, severe insect activity, and no externally visible wounds. Toxicology is pending. As of now, there is no conclusive evidence on whether Angela died of natural causes, an overdose, or trauma. And until that is resolved, the DA is unlikely to push for a homicide indictment. Still, the public conversation has already convicted Charles Byrd in the court of opinion. Neighbors interviewed by local outlets described Angela as quiet but kind, someone who hadn't been herself for a while. A few recalled loud arguments between the couple earlier in the year. Nothing overtly violent, just the slow boil of tension too many households bury behind closed doors. But now those same details carry weight. In hindsight, everyone hears the red flags. Legally, Byrd has not made any further statements. He's been assigned a public defender. Bail has not yet been set. Records show he had no prior convictions, but a sealed incident report from 2019 involving alleged verbal threats is now under judicial review. Investigators continue to comb through digital devices seized from the home, including both Angela's phone and Charles's laptop, which he left behind during his time in hiding. The digital evidence, according to a lead detective, will define what happens next. Metadata, browser history, deleted messages. Each could either confirm or undermine suspicion of premeditated harm. As of this writing, nothing from those sources has been publicly disclosed. Meanwhile, Angela's family, particularly her daughter from a previous marriage, has requested privacy. There was no public funeral. Her remains have been quietly cremated. A single obituary ran in the local paper, leaving out all mention of the circumstances surrounding her death. It simply read, "Angela Byrd, beloved mother, passed away at home." That absence of detail has sparked commentary, but also reflection. At the core of this case is not just an unanswered legal question, but a moral one. How long does silence shield a perpetrator? How long does a woman's death have to be hidden before it demands a name, a voice, a verdict? We may never get full clarity. The system is slow, evidence degrades, people forget. But what remains undeniable is that Angela deserved better, not just in death, but in life. Her end, left concealed in plastic while those around her kept moving, points to a darker issue that goes beyond this one man or this one case. In 2025, there are still women dying behind closed doors, their suffering ignored, their disappearances chalked up to "she needed space." Angela Byrd didn't leave. She didn't disappear. She died, alone, and someone chose to hide that. That, at minimum, is the crime. In the end, what happened to Angela Byrd is not just a tragedy, it's a reminder that silence protects no one, that ignoring red flags, brushing off gut instincts, or staying quiet to keep the peace can cost lives. As someone who's watched too many stories end like this, I'll say this: if something feels wrong, say it. If someone disappears from their own life, ask why. If this story moved you or made you think, drop a comment and share where you're watching from, or what part of this case stuck with you the most. And if it didn't sit right, I'd still love to hear why. Let's talk about it. If you found this video meaningful, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next case we break down, because sometimes understanding one story might just help someone else survive theirs.